Good evening. A special meeting of the Board of Trustees of Socorro Independent School District will be held Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. The time is 5:30. If you would please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Okay, at this time, this should be a fast meeting. Public comment, none. New business. A, discussion and approval of minor amendment to a final redistricting plan adopted on December 13th, 2022. Dr. Cruz.
Good evening, Board President Mena, members of the board, Dr. Carmen. We're bringing this item back for discussion and adoption by the board. This will be a presentation of minor amendments to the final redistricting plan that will be provided to the board for consideration. And we have online with us Ashley White, Rocky Gardner, Linda McBride, and Matthew Cluck.
Good evening, everyone. I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague, Lisa McBride, and she's going to start off the presentation for us today.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Good evening, board members. I am Lisa McBride, and I'm here with Ashley Wright and Rocky Gardner, who have been working with you on this redistricting process. And as Dr. Cruz indicated, we're here tonight to review with you some proposed redistricting map revisions requested by El Paso County. Next slide, please. As you know, you as a team have been working on the redistricting process and completed that process in December of 2022. That's a statutorily both state and federal required process, and also statutorily required once you adopt a redistricting map, you have to provide it to the county so the county can upload it and prepare for elections under that map to ensure that voters get an accurate ballot. So as the district was required to do, it shared its map with El Paso County, and El Paso is coming back, as is common in redistricting, and is requesting some minor changes to the map, some of which we are recommending that you adopt, many of which we are not recommending that you will adopt, and we'll go and discuss that in more detail. But just to emphasize, these are minor, non-substantive changes, and none of them affect the redistricting or population rebalancing work that you completed in December of 2022. So we start as a baseline, next slide, Ashley, with the map 1A that you adopted. Just visually, I'd like the board to orient itself with that map. I know you're familiar with it, because we'd like to overlay on that map areas where the county is suggesting changes. And there are about two dozen of them, but all except for two involve zero population. They involve tiny slivers of area that have absolutely no individuals. We're not just talking about citizen voting age or voting age, but no population in them. Only two slivers actually involve voting age population individuals, and those two slivers combined, we're only talking about 22 people. But we've divided these recommended changes into three groups, and it's only the first group, changes A through D, that we're recommending that you adopt. The remaining changes are cosmetic. You could adopt them if you wanted to, but there's really no need to adopt those changes. On this map, which came from the county, the black lines represent, the hard black lines represent the single member district boundaries that you adopted under Plan 1A, and the colored sections represent what your 2020 single member district boundaries were, just to orient you. And pay particular attention to changes A through D, We're going to go through each one of these changes in more detail, go to a more granular level so that you can see them and orient yourself a little bit better. But again, our recommendation is only changes A through D. And I will tell you a little bit more about what each of these three sets of changes are before I pass it over to Rocky to go into more detail. So changes A through C involve the difference between your 2010 census blocks making up your outer boundary and your 2020 census blocks. In 2010, there were 3 areas where a census block actually straddled 2 different school districts, but the majority of that census block was in Socorro ISD. So under traditional redistricting principles, you assign all that population to Socorro ISD because you can't split the census block. In 2020, the federal census actually stopped that census block at the district boundary. So now we can assign a portion of that old census block to Socorro ISD and a portion of it to Ysleta. So we're making the recommendation that you do so. There are 3 areas. One area involves 0 population, and the other 2 areas involve 22 voting age persons combined. One is 17 voting age persons, and the other is 5 voting age persons. Area D is an area of 0 population sliver that just needs to be assigned to one of the 2 single member districts, 4 or 5, that it is sandwiched between. Areas E through J are 0 population slivers where the county would like for us to assign that sliver actually to the district because its boundaries that it's using for the district are different than those that are under the census or those that even TEA has, which is what the demographer used and what we're recommending that you use because they're more official sources of what your outer boundaries actually are. The remaining changes K through N, are again 0 slivers of population where it is sandwiched between 2 single member districts, and that 0 sliver of population has been appropriately assigned to one of the 2 single member districts that it's sandwiched between, but the county, for cosmetic reasons, would like it assigned to the other single member district, and there's no legal compulsion for you to make that change. If you want to, you can, but there's no legal compulsion for you to make those change. And so those are the 3 categories of changes. The first category involves the difference between your 2010 and 2020 census block. In 2010, having 3 census blocks that straddled 2 school districts. 2020, those census blocks actually ending at the district boundary. Then the second set of changes resulting from conflicting boundary sources regarding the school district's outer boundaries. And then the last set of changes, which are purely cosmetic, the county wanting the school district to assign a 0 sliver sandwiched between 2 single member districts that was appropriately assigned to one of the 2 single member districts to the other single member district, which you have no legal requirement to do. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Rocky to go more in detail into the changes, starting with changes A through D.
Thank you, Lisa. Members of the board, it's a pleasure to be back visiting with Socorro. So this first chart here Ashley, I'm gonna get it right eventually, is kind of run the show for me there. You can see A is the top one. So this is a census block. I want to point out the yellow outlines represent the 2010 census blocks, and the pink that you see there is the 2020 census blocks. So these blocks were initially included on the outside because we were trying to match what was there in 2010, because that's how we always start a process. And the reason they were selected, like Lisa said, in 2010 is because the majority of that census block in 2010 was in Socorro. So that's section A there, and that section A has about a total population of 29 persons. I think it's 21 in the big section, and there's supposedly 8 persons in that little triangle. Again, this is based on census data. So you can see that that voting age population is 17, and those are an area that we would recommend removing from the amended, as part of the amended plan. Down below a little ways, you see the same thing happening. A yellow outline. We followed that yellow outline initially, but now we know that we can pull that out and we can match the ISD boundary there, and there's just zero population there in B. We go to the next slide. C and D, looks a little bit busier. It's zoomed out there, but C, we had 4 large 2010 census blocks that were split in 2020, and we can now pull them out. Now you can see in C, we do have 5 persons that reside within that the total pop of 6, but the voting age pop of 5 in the far southern one that we're putting back into Isleta. The 3 above it do not have any population. So again, we're just pulling a few back out. So this will have a little change there in the boundary, but again, the majority of that is in Isleta, so we should move that out. D is the one that we were talking about. Now that's one that sits between single member District 4 and single member District 5, and it runs down the middle of the loop 375. So there's no population there, but it was inadvertently put in single member District 1. So that's why we believe we should go ahead and make this change, because it could be in either 4 or 5. It doesn't matter which one, but it just would be more reasonable to have that in 4 or 5 than in 1. That was just such a small sliver that it was missed when we did the initial edits. So that's the first group.
If you'll go back, Ashley, I just want to make sure. So 1 is in blue, that 0 sliver is in blue, and you can see it bisects 4 and 5, which are in green in the kind of that reddish color. And so what we're recommending is that sliver that has 0 population either be placed in the green or be placed in the red in 4 or 5. Sorry, Ashley. Sorry, Rocky.
Thank you, Lisa.
So the second set of requested changes result from the county using different boundaries or a different boundary source than our demographers have. Our demographers have relied on official sources coming from the Census Bureau and the Texas Education Agency, but El Paso County and even sometimes the school districts' boundaries for the district are different than those sources. And Rocky, I'll allow you to go in different, explain in more detail, but just as an overview, the school district's internal boundaries that it uses are in green on this slide, El Paso County in black, the census boundaries in dark blue, and you probably can't even see the dark blue because the census boundaries almost exactly, except in one area, match TEA's boundaries for the district, which are in yellow, which you can see. The yellow is actually sitting on top of the blue, and so you can see the yellow, you can't see the blue because they're almost identical. Rocky?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Yes, school district boundaries are always a challenge, and we work with a lot of school districts, and sometimes we need to make adjustments. But as you can see, there doesn't appear to be a real official source for school district boundaries. When we downloaded all of our 2020 census block data, they had an ISD boundary that they were using, so we download that boundary. With all of our demographic work that we do, we download a shape file from the TEA, and so we download those, and those have been the 2 ISD boundaries that we've used for all of our redistricting this past couple of years. Now, Socorro ISD has provided us a boundary, and so has El Paso County, and really we can't say that which is right, and actually where people pay taxes, I guess, is where it's right. And so if you did a dissolve based on ISD boundaries, that could be considered, based on where they pay taxes, that could be considered official, but we don't have one that matches. They're all just different, as you can see from this chart. That's why when we go forward here, we recommend staying with what we use, because we used what we had available and what was official in our source. And because there's no population, there's not necessarily a reason to change it. Ashley, could go forward one slide, please. So this first group, E, F, and G, these are along the outside borders. And what I wanted to point out is the size of these census blocks. Now, what you're seeing outlined in light blue, I'm using my cursor, but you can't see my cursor. What you're seeing outlined in light blue on there is actually the 2020 census block. I just selected it. And as you can see, if we move, in order to move that block back to the green and black line that you might be able to see, it's especially visible there on E, you would have to split a census block. So we can't really split a census block to make that happen. And the same is the case with F and G. There's just not a way that we could move those even if they did match up. And as you can see in F there, the green line kind of runs at an angle. And in G there, you see the green line going there. And that green line is the ISD or the county boundary. So that's why we recommend no change there at E, F, and G. Next slide. Okay, these slides, H and I run along the eastern border with Clint ISD. Now, as you can see, our line, the blue line you see there, that again, that's the census line. That's the block that we selected. And we don't recommend moving that simply because the ISD boundary that we used, that's the source that we had. And the same is on that one in the far north, which is again another one that goes into Isleta. And it's just, there's a gap there, but again, it's a very small sliver, and we just don't recommend that move there either. Next slide. These are, you okay with me going, Lisa? Or?
I'm good with you going, Rocky.
Okay.
Go ahead.
These next slides are actually internal slides. So these are areas where there's just, it's kind of a tomato thing. K&L there, K&L run along Loop 375. Why the Census Bureau has made slivers with no population like this, we'll never know. But you can see there that we have that sliver there assigned to 1. It's blue. On M there, you can see the 2 and the 4. It can be either one. Again, there's no population assigned to those slivers. And then in N, the same thing. In N there, that's following along Gateway Boulevard. No population. It's just following a road. And we would, again, recommend no change just based on there's no population. So there's not a real reason to change it. Back to
So if you go to the next slide, our recommendation is that the board adopt the amendments to Plan 1A, which incorporates the areas of change A through D. Those are those changes that involve the difference between those 2010 census blocks and 2020 census blocks, as well as that one sliver that was assigned to single member District 1 that just needs to be assigned to single member District 405, but involves 0 population. We are not recommending that the board would adopt a revised map that would incorporate the other changes, because number one, they would affect the outer boundary of the district and make it inconsistent with the boundary as TEA has the boundary and as the Census Bureau has the boundary. And then that for those last set of changes that are purely cosmetic, you have a 0 sliver area that we've assigned to one of the single member districts that it's adjacent to, and the county is just requesting that you assign it to the other single member district. And you can if you want to, but you don't have to. So it's just kind of purely up to your choice. But we are recommending that you make changes A through D and adopt the order and resolution that would be incorporating making those changes. Now, I do have to remind you that the bulk of your work with respect to redistricting, there is a statute that governs that work that says that in order for it to be effective at an upcoming election, those changes have to be made 3 months prior to that election. And so you completed that in December of 2022. The amendments that are being recommended tonight are really as a result of 2 different systems trying to talk to each other. A system that is census block based, which is what the demographers use, trying to communicate with a election precinct being the smallest unit of geography system, which is what the county has used. So these are minor, non-substantive changes to allow those systems to better communicate with each other. And so we don't believe these are official changes to your boundary that make you miss that deadline or would require you to seek a court order in order to make those changes, because you're not affecting population in most situations. And you are doing this in order to make, at a granular level, two systems communicate with each other. And that concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
When were you guys notified of this?
Last week, I believe. Ashley, was it last Wednesday or Thursday? And then we requested an opportunity to meet with you guys this week in order to explain that.
I think it was actually the week prior.
Was it the week before? Okay.
Yeah.
The county just notified you a week ago or 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
Yes.
And I remember when I was sitting down with the gentleman, actually some of the boundary lines or one of them that you guys presented, that was one of the concerns that we were having an issues with. And I remember back in December when I was talking about precincts and I was waiting for the response. I know the motion was made, but I had already actually started questioning this back in December. And it's very unfortunate, I guess, that we're here now, because I think it could have been addressed back in December. Had I been allowed to continue with my question, not the motion made. Because you even talk about the precincts, how it affected the precincts, that was part of my question that I was waiting for back in December. Now, when I had asked if we could go ahead and change it, or can there be an amendment, at the time you guys said no. But right now, you guys are saying that we can make an amendment. So help me understand that back then it wasn't okay, but now it is.
And I was not at that meeting, so I'll have to rely on my colleagues.
Yeah, so I'll touch on that. So the change that when you approached us, I think that was the week before we were about to adopt the final map. And so we wanted to keep in line with the statute, which is that it has to be adopted within 3 months, no later than 3 months before the election. So that was the reason for our response. The changes that we're talking about now is not the same as the changes that, and I don't recall specifically what those changes were. I believe it had to do with moving an area along the canal. I think,
Yep.
Along Socorro Road. So that was a different, for one, the timing was different. We weren't at a state of, the timing was different, as well as the type of change that you were talking about is different than the type of change that we are talking about today, because these are more related to just minor boundary changes as a result of a difference between two systems that are one's using a census-based way of drawing the boundaries, and the other one is using the election precinct boundaries.
Because I do remember
And I
asking,
just
don't
is there a
remember
way to
any-
make it more efficient? Because I know the individual that was manipulating the map was a little bit frustrated. He's like, yeah, that's just the way it is. But I asked if there's no way to make it more efficient. But apparently, I guess it had to have come through the county that allows it to make it more efficient.
Well, and I just want to clarify, these changes don't affect your election precincts. The point I was trying to make was, for redistricting, the smallest unit of geography is the census block, which is not the same thing as an election precinct. What the county is doing for purposes of elections is taking this information and putting it in an election precinct-based system. And sometimes, as a result of that, those two systems need to communicate. So this is quite frequent, having to make these minor adjustments to maps after a redistricting process.
I was just curious why. Okay.
Are these people going to be able to participate in this election?
Yes, You mean the 22 who
Yes.
who would be affected by making this change? We're clearly demarcating who's in Socorro versus who's in Isleta. Yes.
And it has nothing to do with the 90 days prior to the election. This is set, right? It's not going to interfere with their right to vote here.
If you adopt this change, it will not interfere with their right to vote. If we don't adopt this change, we've got those 22 people technically assigned to Socorro ISD because in 2010 they were. But now that census block actually stops at the district boundary. So if you don't make this change, then the county is saying, where do I assign these people? Because I technically know they're in Ysleta. So making this change actually makes it easier for the county to assign them to an election precinct so they get a proper ballot with proper people to vote for.
Okay.
So currently, these people are Isleta voters right now, and they're paying taxes at Isleta or Socorro.
They are in Ysleta ISD. I do not want to make any representations because I don't know about your taxing system, about where they pay taxes.
That's tricky because of the, that's based on, appraisal records. Based on our ISD boundaries, they would be paying paying taxes in Isleta now that based on that ISD boundary. But again, the ISD boundaries not as official as the appraisal records are.
So these houses were overlooked in 2010 or 2020.
I don't know about overlook. They were included in one large census block in 2010.
So are they east of George Dieter or west? These houses, because my understanding is when I was campaigning 4 years ago, anything west or east of George Dieter belongs to SISD. Is that correct? So these houses are on our side.
No,
I couldn't make out in the map. That's why.
I'm going to bring that slide up. The area that we're proposing that we move is on the west. Yeah, is not on your side. We're proposing to move blocks that were split between 2010 and 2020, and move those into Isleta, which is on the west side of George Dieter. They're all on the west side.
Again.
Bring up the map because I couldn't really identify.
So, and this is and this is what the good news for this too is. This is an area where all the ISD boundaries I referenced before were the same on the west side there. So, you can move your cursor. They might be able to see your cursor, Ashley, but move your cursor up and down that pink.
So these houses are east. Where's George Dieter at?
Well, I guess that you're right. George, they are technically. I think George Dieter is that road that kind of curves there, right?
So let's go to letter A. What is that intersection right there? Is that George Dieter, and what is the one going from left to right?
Pebble
east to
Hills.
west? Pebble Hills.
Pebble Hills. And if you look south, you're going to see the Walgreens,
Okay.
and then you're going to see that there's a warehouse there. It's where it curves.
There's that bend.
Yeah, there's a curve. It shows
Yeah.
the boundary there of
So-
George Dieter. So that pink line divided
So
Isleta and
yeah, so that east
and then
side of
Socorro.
George Dieter between your boundary is technically in Isleta, right through there.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, at least that's based on all the boundaries layers that we have just for that area where George, where it comes out and goes back in between A and B. That area is on the east side there on those curves is Isleta.
And it should be ours because if it's on this side of George Dieter, it should be ours.
So that's the intersection of David Carrasco and George Dieter right there. So it's a small block of houses. When you come further south down, I believe that might be beachfront.
Mhm.
Does the line cut there? Is it just that little almost triangle or whatever that weird looking design is that? That was Isleta, and then everything else south of that?
Is that C, guys? Is that further?
I'm not sure where you're referring to now.
Yeah, you got a terrible map here.
Basically from where Estrada hits George Dieter in the south,
Mm-hmm.
to, and if you just go, so think of Estrada and George Dieter, that's that very bottom point there where the pink and the yellow come together on B.
Yeah.
Yeah, right where Ashley's cursor is. And then if you go to the north, all the way up to A, that is where, then I guess it's kind of basically David
So you
Carrera.
have 29 people at A, and I'm trying to figure out where these houses are.
Yeah,
And so I
well,
know this
that's-
street up here is Pebble Hills, and then you go down here and
It's
that's
behind the Walgreens.
So
It's that first intersection,
Again-
David Carrasco. So you go south, you got the warehouses they just built, the self-storage warehouses.
okay,
You have the county annex that's just south of that there.
So it's
And,
these right
I
here.
guess there's like
Yeah.
that
I-
new
I
optical
think there's-
place. And so all this back then, all that belongs to Isleta District, am I correct?
the area in
It's
that pink
Isleta.
is based on our ISD boundaries. Yes, sir.
But how about the
And
taxes?
yeah, you're right. 21 persons total population, and then 8 just in that little triangle above it. But of course, we're not responsible for the the population. That's the official number, though.
Yeah, but their taxing entity, is it Isleta or is it Socorro?
He doesn't know.
I think I can speak to
We
that.
don't base our data on the ISD
But you
boundary.
might
Yeah, I can talk to that.
disenfranchise them out of Isleta.
Yes, go ahead.
We have some lots that actually are kind of split between Isleta and us, according to central appraisal. So they're paying taxes to both school districts. And then,
How could that be? How can you be paying?
well, they split the lot. So if you notice that line that goes north to south, it doesn't follow George Dieter. It actually goes from north to south, and that's the split between us and Isleta. So some of the lots are actually split.
If you can give me an address, we can look it up.
Yes, I can give you an address. David Carrasco should be the earliest. And then in recent years, I think we actually had some lots that actually combined into one lot, and they have both Isleta and Socorro listed on their tax rolls. So,
I'll tell you what, I would be upset if I was if
Yeah.
they don't know which district I belong to, especially how much money we're paying in taxes.
exactly. So yeah, David Carrasco, I think, is the only street that has the population. The rest is commercial property.
I mean, I hope it's Socorro because I would like to, inherit those properties.
It's part of the old District 3. They got relocated out to District 1.
So the yellow is the census block, correct?
The yellow is the 2010 census block. The pink is the 2020 census block.
But the county
So-
has it like the way the pink line is, right?
The county, and so do we. Our line follows that as well. That's why we're recommending the change.
To take out the pink, correct?
Yes.
Right.
But
So
keeping the portion of the yellow that's not part of the pink, correct?
Oh, sure. Yeah, on the
Yeah,
east side.
Yeah.
So we have 11305 David Carrasco, which is split between Isleta and us. The majority of the home falls within Isleta. So I don't know if they have a rule of where the bedrooms fall is where the student would end up, but majority is Isleta.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same
Is-
thing
is there
across
a-
the street. 11312 is also split.
Okay. So,
I mean, I guess how do we keep this simple? I mean, to me, when I see it, I'm like, just the main road and identifier is just George Dieter. Anything
Correct.
west of George Dieter is Isleta's. Anything east of George Dieter is Socorro's. And I mean, it just seems much more simple because, I mean, if I go here to my next door neighbor, all of a sudden, I got to take a bus to go to Hanks. I got to take a bus to go to Mountwood. And it's like, it really, theoretically, it doesn't make sense.
Nah.
Is there
However,
anything
our-
that we can do just to leave it the way can we legally leave it the way it was in 2010?
Our voting
Well,
boundaries have
just
nothing
for
to do with our
clarification,
attendance boundaries, do
these
they?
are our electoral boundaries, not attendance boundaries. I've heard you.
Can you
talk
speak
about
up?
that.
We can't hear you.
I was just saying, these are electoral boundaries, not attendance boundaries, so it wouldn't determine what school or anything like that someone's going to.
So then, but I mean, put yourself in the individual shoes. So I'm gonna go vote. My kid's gonna go to Isleta, but I'm gonna go vote for an SISD board member. I mean, help me understand that.
That's what we're trying to correct.
Yeah,
These
but it would
houses.
come, it would come down
Right.
to the
I
taxing
looked up the
entity.
taxing entity,
Yes,
as we all can. And when I look up the address on David Carrasco, 11300, which is that corner house,
corner house.
the taxing entity is Isleta, not Socorro.
Yes.
So they shouldn't be able to vote in Socorro.
We can correct it and make it ours. In other words, we can inherit those, all that property right there.
No.
No,
So,
it has to
no,
stay with
what we
Isleta.
are- Yeah, what we are recommending is that you follow the 2020 census, which now stops at your district boundary. So you no longer have a census block that straddles two school districts like you had in 2010. So in 2010, we literally had to put people in Socorro who physically probably were in Isleta because under redistricting principles, the majority of that census block was in Socorro, and we could not subdivide that census block. We literally, if that census block had 100 people in it, we assigned all 100 people to Socorro. Now we know, because that census block is split, that there are 29 people on the, I guess, west side, which should technically be in Ysleta. Even though the larger part, which is the yellow squares, are in Socorro still. But we literally know how many people now, because that census block has been divided to stop at your district boundary, are in Isleta, so we can make that divide. And we no longer have to have that entire census block in Socorro's boundary.
Ms. McBride simply stated this property is part of the Isleta district, and making this adopting this amendment correctly allocates them to the Isleta district, because our boundaries would be corrected.
Correct. It correctly allocates those 29 individuals in Area A and those 6 individuals in Area C.
Well,
which we
regardless
could
of
not have
individuals, it assigns the property, because it could be 29, it could be 5, it could be, we don't know who lives there. We know who lived there at the census, but the
Correct.
important
We know
piece
who-
is the boundary is property-based, not individual-based. And so it aligns the property with the correct boundaries.
Yes.
So we're adopting that
Well,
pink
now,
line, right?
I want to, sorry, I want to be clear. So these, if we make these changes right here, A, B, and C, then we have been consistent and followed the same ISD boundary all the way around your district. These were the three spots where our block data was inconsistent with the ISD boundary that we downloaded from TEA and from census. So now we have, by making this, we've now matched all the way around your district. We have it fall within the ISD boundary that we use, that we being our company download from the TEA or census.
So you're proposing that we continue following that pink line as the boundary. Am I correct?
There's a black line there, but yes,
Yeah,
yes, I guess in theory, the right side of the pink line, the pink line's actually a block, so the pink line's actually not just a single
So
line.
we're gonna
but-
cut the census block, right? And
No, we're not cutting the census block. We're pulling census blocks. In 2010, we would have had to cut census blocks, which is why they were included. In 2020, they're not, they were split by the Census Bureau into 2 blocks. So we can pull out the ones on the west side.
that's what I'm saying. So everything west of that line is Isleta. They are not gonna vote in
It's
Socorro.
outside of our district line.
Okay, so that,
The pink
So you're adapting the pink line for the boundary, the voting boundary, right?
The pink would be a census block that's in Ysleta. Is that correct, Rocky?
The pink would be in a census, yes. In what, from our boundary file, it would be in Isleta.
So those 20 people will vote Ysleta and not Socorro. Am I correct? Okay.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
And just for a little more information, I think we do have an agreement with Isleta on some of those addresses. I can go ahead and provide the document to the board if they'd like to take a look at that.
What does that entail? Or, I mean,
Just, I think last time I looked at it, it just entails an agreement on which addresses Isleta would take and which addresses Socorro would take. So I can get that to you. Yeah. Okay.
Motion to approve recommended amendments A through D with the sliver identified in D being assigned to District 4, which was represented in the red and is adjacent to that sliver.
Okay.
Okay.
Ever go to 5 though?
It's right next to District 4, so that sliver, remember, that sliver is Joe Battle.
So on which side of that is it on?
Well, when we looked at the map, if you can bring up the map again, I believe District 4 was represented in the red, and it runs all alongside District 4. Really,
I have to see the map. I thought it was.
could you bring that map up again
See,
real quick?
It belonged to me, and I knew it for a reason. It was.
Next slide.
All of the gateway addresses.
You look.
That's right. There's
E?
no addresses. It's just a road.
Remember, it's Joe Battle, so there's nothing on there. But if you look at the bottom of that blue line, right where it ends, it's red right below it. I mean, so it's just sliding over the red a little to the left to include Joe Battle.
So this is basically, map D is basically Loop 375, am I correct? Because
Yes.
half of Loop
It's Loop-
375 falls into the county in that area. And it's not annexed by the city, so their boundary moves there for the county line.
I don't know how in the world I
So-
inherited that, but anyways.
Yeah,
okay.
so it's not gonna affect any voters there. It was just the other ones up, let's see, C.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. So I have a motion by Mr. Nájera, a second by Mr. Guerra. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. All right, guys. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for your information. We'll adjourn the meeting. The time is 6:12. Have a good evening.